I wanted to spend some time and make a video on what a future police reform bill may look like based on all the available information from legislators currently pushing reform. Now, I know this isn't a business or finance related topic, which is normally my area of expertise, so I hope I can do this topic justice, as I just felt the need to do my part and help package all the ideas that are just currently floating around. These are extremely complicated issues we're dealing with, and my goal is to present what future reform may look like in the most easy to understand and unbiased way possible. So, starting off from the beginning, in case you've been off the grid for the last few weeks, the horrific death of George Floyd by a police officer has sparked protests, both peaceful and violent, across the country. The death of Floyd seems to be the straw that broke the camel's back on race relations, police brutality, and the need for police reform. The silver lining is that due to this uproar, there actually seems to be some action happening. Many legislators are shifting their focus to pass police reform bills to help prevent a death like Floyd's from ever happening again and check the power of police officers. The House is set to announce a sweeping police reform bill within weeks, and this is what we'll likely see on that bill based upon what its major contributors are saying. So starting off, Cory Booker is one of the front and center legislators fighting for police reform, and he has announced a three-piece framework he'd like to use to tackle his most major issues with the current system. Now, I'm going to attempt to break down each of these three issues and their individual parts as simply as I can. That way they're actually understandable by a normal person. So starting with the first piece of reform. This is in regards to holding police officers more accountable in federal court for misconduct. Currently, Section 242 of Title 18 makes it a crime for any law official to purposefully deprive a person of a right or a privilege protected by the Constitution. This in itself sounds reasonable. However, there are two kind of loopholes in this law that Booker wants to resolve. The first being modifying what is called the intent standard. The intent standard is what is necessary to prove a discriminatory case. Currently, in order to prove an anti-discrimination claim against an officer, the officer must need to be proven to have an explicit discriminatory intent, which doesn't work in most cases because these actions are usually unconscious and showing racial intent is nearly impossible. A common suggested replacement to the intent standard is the disparate impact standard, which uses statistical evidence to show anti-racial trends, but that in itself has its own issues as well. The second loophole is the use of qualified immunity. Qualified immunity prevents government officials from being sued for their actions taken within the scope of their work. The issues with this are similar to the last loophole. Let's say an officer made a poor judgment and an illegal judgment call. Under qualified immunity, the officer would not be held personally liable if he first believed that what he had done was lawful, and second, the action was reasonable. So looking at this, it's a very similar issue to proving intent. It's nearly impossible except for just in extreme cases. Now, before I move on to the second piece of reform, I'd like to point out that I'm just explaining the issues at hand. I don't claim to have the answers to these issues, and I'm sure any changes made will come with their own potential side effects and their own issues. My goal is simply just to explain what's being proposed and why it's being proposed. All right, moving on. The goal of the next piece of reform from Cory Booker is to improve the transparency of policing by collecting better police misconduct and use of force data. This would be done in two ways. The first way is by creating a national police misconduct registry to ensure that the bad egg officers can't avoid accountability by changing departments. Now, this one was really surprising to me because it was just surprising because it isn't already a system, I guess. This change seems like an obvious change to me and is much less nuanced and complicated compared to the first piece of reform we just talked about. And then second, transparency would be increased by requiring state and local law enforcement agencies to report use of force incidents to the Department of Justice. And This one just also seems like a good idea to me. The third piece of reform, according to Booker's framework, does several things, so let's break them down one by one. First, it would ban religious and racial profiling, which I'm sure that's already banned, so what I assume this means is they're just going to add more specifics and more situational kind of rules for this. Second, it would provide funding for racial bias training for law enforcement. This seems like a good idea to me, and I would personally like to see a similar increase in funding for handling situations with disabled people. This is because, according to a report published by the Ruderman Family Foundation, nearly half of all deaths caused by the police are people with some form of disability. And reading that just really is saddening, and I hope to see some additional training on that front as well. Third, it would incentivize states to adopt policies banning no-knock warrants. And then finally, this would incentivize states to adopt policies banning the use of chokehold and other airway restrictive holds in their use of force policies. Now, this doesn't really seem to be a new idea completely sparked by George Floyd. On this topic, I found an article from 1993 on New York City banning the use of chokeholds by police officers. This happened after a 21-year-old died in the hands of the police from traumatic asphyxia. Now, this might sound pretty similar to you because 5 officers were charged in this case, but the charges against 4 were dropped, and then the 5th was deemed not guilty. So this has been an issue for quite a while. So this is all that Booker and his associates proposed so far, and we'll see in the coming weeks how these ideas will be formed into specific law. Beyond this, there are some other ideas and other proposals being considered. Most of them are quite similar to Booker's ideas and maybe just word them in a different way, so I'm not going to repeat myself on those fronts, but let's go over some of the differences or other ideas that other proposals have. So another proposal talks at length about the need for more data collection and even proposes getting historical data from police departments, including things like race, age, gender, just the general makeup of those who are arrested, the racial makeup of officers and the arrestees in historical data, types of arrests, cases in which force was needed, and much more. There was a huge list of things. And then there was another proposal limiting the use of deadly force in many situations, including disallowing the use of deadly force to prevent the escape of a fleeing suspect, which there's a lot of people who are against that. Disallowing the use of firearms to disable moving vehicles, no warning shots allowed, officers trained in de-escalation training, and disallowing officers from discharging a weapon simply because they fear for their lives. Now, I believe all of those ideas have really good intentions. However, these are attempts to try to make one rule, one overarching rule for every situation. And unfortunately, things just aren't that simple in reality. I suppose this is where exceptions can be, written into law, and as time passes, rules will be made for unique situations as they happen. But these are extremely complicated situations, and every rule or lack of rule made in these cases will literally mean the difference of life or death for those who, in that last-minute split decision, are in the hands of these rules. So I just feel it is very important for lawmakers to thoroughly think of the cause and effect of every single one of these rules and the secondary effects of every single one of these rules when weighing the options and deciding to put something into law or not. So moving on, another piece of potential reform is the use of non-police or ex-police incident oversight. This would create an agency to analyze and have an unbiased investigation on things like the use of firearms or the use of force. I believe the use of an unaffiliated committee is just always a good idea. This is one of my biggest issues overall, and this is just my opinion, but I just personally have a big issue with unchecked power. There just needs to be unbiased checks and balances for all things, especially for those who have any amount of power. Finally, there are some proposals regarding police body camera regulation. These ones are pretty straightforward. These proposals would disallow officers from viewing or editing their own footage, would require officers to upload their footage daily, tampering with footage would be looked at the same as tampering with evidence, which makes total sense. It basically is evidence. And all body camera footage would be released to the public within 10 days of an officer-involved shooting, unedited and with sound. So those all seem like potentially good ideas and things that you would almost just expect them already to be a thing. So some of these changes were very surprising that they're not already things. Other things have just the potential for secondary effects, which I just fear, but I think the overall intent is just to move to a better system. This was the bulk of all the potential ideas currently floating around regarding the upcoming police reform bill. Whether you agree or disagree with these ideas, I sincerely hope that this video helped you understand what we'll see on the table in the coming weeks. If you enjoyed my breakdown of this extremely complicated and tense subject, please consider hitting the subscribe button and the like button on this video. It would help me out. It helps push my videos to a wider audience. I would appreciate it so very much. And if you didn't enjoy this breakdown, don't subscribe and don't even let me know, because I don't need that negativity in my life. So anyways, until next time, I'd like to thank you for watching, and I hope you have a profitable day.